So as we begin, I want to invite you to set down anything you're holding, pens, papers, worries, the world's concerns, whatever you may be holding on to. You can just set that aside right now. Personal challenges. I think I was not going to use this microphone, but I think I will. Just a clearer recording here. All right. And then go ahead and settle back. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes and let yourself be in the presence of John of the Cross, in whatever way you wish, whether it's imagining you're before a statue or in a place where he was, or in a place that's Carmelite, that's of inspiration, or opening your awareness and letting him be with you, before you, whether it's in an image of physical form, whether it's the sense of his presence, whether you know him or not. Because I'd like you to receive his utterances here as much from him as is possible. So, eyes are closed, and I'll give you a few moments in silence to choose which way you'll be open to John's transmission of these words. In order to arrive at having pleasure in everything, desire to have pleasure in nothing. In order to arrive at possessing everything, desire to possess nothing. In order to arrive at being everything, desire to be nothing. In order to arrive at knowing everything, desire to know nothing. Mine are the heavens, and mine is the earth. Mine are the people. The righteous are mine, and mine are the sinners. The angels are mine, and the Mother of God. And all things are mine. And God himself, herself, is mine and for me. For Christ is mine, and all for me. What then do you ask for and seek, my soul? Yours is all this, and it is all for you. And in the presence of those utterances, I invite you to open your eyes. I don't want to assume how much you know or don't know about John. He's one of these individuals that remarkably, we have a lot about his life. We have a lot about the chronology and the events of his life. As reclusive as he was as a human being, and he sought that all the time, somehow it's incredible, remarkable, really, about how intimate we can get with him through the storyline of his life and through the correspondences and writings that come there about. Even when I think of it, I find myself really moved deeply. Because it would be so easy to look at his life and really remark on how tragic so many of these events were. And then it would be possible as well to look at his life and go, wow, how spiritual amidst it all. It would be easy to vacillate between those two opinions, those two landing places. But I think both of them miss the deeper intimacy that we have in this mystic, in this individual, in this soul that's so illumined. On the one side, we get caught in the story of the tragedy of human nature putting down good and oppression and injustice. And on the other side, we err on the side of spiritual bypassing, to say, wow, amidst it all, he was just so sublime and so blissful all the time. And miss what he reveals to us in his life. And that is that he was so tender-hearted. He was so caring about all of his relationships. Not caring in a way of like owning like this, but caring in the way that he mentions one time when he was in a position where he couldn't receive any mail from his fellow nuns in the order, and how he felt like he was swallowed up in the whale, and that every day was painful because he couldn't receive any correspondence. And it could be very easy to miss that there's this incredibly vulnerable human being that was very given to his relationships and going with the beauty and the flow of where the connection was and where it was deprived, and how amidst that his becoming in union with God happened, amidst all of that, not in spite of it, not in light of it, but actually in the throes of these life events. And he reveals such a level of availability to the messages of God within it, that at least it seems, from how I've gotten to know him personally, and then through his writings, and then being over in Spain leading the retreat, and then for my years of celebration, it seems to me he was someone that was free of pretense, free of guile, and incredibly available for this gift of life he was given, and constantly being available interiorly to be faithful to what the fullness of life really was. He wasn't someone that tended to postulate or have practices to move him towards something. He was somebody that in the insight and the incredible awareness in relation to his life experiences, plunged over and over and again into the presence of God. And with that, I just want to cite a couple moments that I'll be drawing upon. Many of you are probably aware that there's that renowned instance when he was kidnapped when he was 35, only 35 years old. So he shifted over to be a Carmelite with Teresa of Avila when he was 25, and he was very influential because of the nature of his mystical experiences and very sought after, but he was also very down to earth. And so when he was 35, you may know that he was kidnapped for 7 months. But he was actually kidnapped before that and ended up being free because of Teresa's lobbying with the King of Spain at the time. From the moment he said yes to Teresa, he set himself up for a lot of unusual notoriety, whether it was being placed in a leadership position, to being deposed, to placed in another position of leadership, to being imprisoned. I mean, there was like very little time in his short life. He died when he was 49. Very little time that he wasn't within one of the other of those. And yet, when he joined her order, because he was moved by the Carmelite charism to be a hermit, to have union with the divine, to live in silence, when he said yes to that, the first men's monastery founded in Durello was him with 2 men, where he spent his days sweeping the dirt floor. I still don't know exactly what it means to sweep a dirt floor, but that's what they did. But that was short-lived. In those 2 poems, you'll see that he found his way by being able to penetrate the paradoxes that are in life. The paradox that the place that fullness is experienced is in the void of where we think fullness may be. The place where union happens is the place when everything of the personality has been lost. And he gives testimony to that in those poems. But it goes further than that. I'm going to read to you a passage before he escaped that we have in record. And it's kind of neat because a lot of my references come from things that aren't popular and known because of having been Carmelite. I've kind of got like the in on some things. He had this image that came to him. And the image was when he was a young boy and he had fallen into a well in Medina del Campo. And he was so little, he didn't know how to pull himself out. But he said a magnificent lady pulled him out. And that lady was Mary, the Mother of God. And he had a vision of this when he was imprisoned in the cell. And he was towards the end of his time. He was there 7 months. So maybe, 6 months, 6.5 months. And shortly after that vision, he connected with the reality that as that happened when he was a little boy, he could now have the same thing happen, even though he was imprisoned in a cell in a monastery in Toledo. He bridged the seeming time difference to tap into the eternal reality that if that help happened then, it could easily happen right now as well. And by August of that year, it was 1578, it doesn't really matter so much the year, he had resolved to escape. And here is the recount. On the eve of the Assumption of the Virgin, the prior of the convent entered John's cell, and after kicking him brutally and rating him for his disobedience, promised to release him if he would abandon the reform and return to the mitigated rule. John replied that he could not break his vows, but asked if he might be allowed to say Mass on the following day, as it was the feast of the Assumption. The prior angrily refused and went out. But that night, Our Lady appeared. Filling his cell with light, she commanded him to escape, promising her assistance. he knew then that he would be capable of doing that because she had done it before. But what's revealed to us in that is not simply the spiritual phenomena of it, but the reality that John in human form didn't understand that that was available to him all along. And maybe the timing wasn't right. But if we were to look at that more deeply, there was something in him that shifted. There was something in him that not in defiance, but in just union with the essence of his being, something within him pushed him to the edge of his own knowing and truth, where there was something of a no more. And in that no more came the memory, the timeless memory of the assistance that is at hand at all times and was at hand for him when he was little. And in that then came the freedom. He was free before he escaped because he had entered into the knowing. And then in the knowing, his mind, because the man that stood outside his door, they, believe it or not, even though the cell was locked and this guy's a gentle guy, they still had somebody stationed outside his door like it was some vicious criminal, had grown to really love him and gave him a sheet or two, because he was given very little and he wasn't even given change of clothes most of the time. And in giving him those sheets, John was free enough to connect. I just ripped these sheets to make a long rope and skinny down the side of the wall. And that's what he did. Penetrating these seeming obstacles in our life, he gives a really strong witness to that, to what the path is to that. And that path is primarily opening up to the brilliance that is at the center of our being. And I don't mean that in a spiritual bypassing way. I mean it as a nuts and bolts, basic answer to the call of what it means to be human. Because it was unleashing that innocence in his childhood and that memory that opened up options that hadn't come to his mind all the way along. And his story begs to us, how willing are we to enter into that magic? How available are we to the experience of the presence of source, of life, as it wishes to show up? I don't think he needed to be brutally beaten the way he was to get to it. But I do think it's an example of what we allow ourselves to be reduced by in order to answer a call at times. Not always. Rumi says so well, as we awaken into our spiritual nature, the lessons come like 2x4s that hit us over the head. And we're wondering why we're suffering so much. And then he goes on to say, as we awaken more and more, we don't need that kind of seeming violence upon ourselves. The lessons come with great subtlety, like the remembrance of a memory when we were incredibly free, available for life. After that illumination that happened, John had tremendous amount of suffering that happened again and again. He was deposed again, he was exiled again. There came a point when, even though we've got a vast number of his writings, many of his letters and writings were even burned by his favorite nuns in one of the monasteries because he was judged as so heretical. And to my anguish, One thing I didn't know till I was over in Spain, Teresa of Avila herself burned, I think, more than 1,000 of his letters. And here they are, contemplative soulmates. So, but after that illumination, he confided that there was a vibrational quality to his being that never subsided. That everything about him was not just illumined, not just a sense of union with source, but that his very cells in his body were vibrating. And that was something that never left him. That's 14 years of being in that state until he passed away. So anything that happened from there on out, obviously, was very, very light. But in leading into that availability, he gives us that first poem I read, which is the nutshell of his entire book, The Ascent of Mount Carmel. That one poem is the foundation for the entire book. The book is the commentary on that one poem. If you desire to possess everything, possess nothing. And all of the other stanzas there. And that is the ascent. But once at the ascent, you have the prayer of the enamored soul. Mine are the heavens and mine are the earth. All things are mine. And he had come to that resting place for the last 14 years of his life. I wanted to spend the first part of this talk speaking about his life, because drawing close to these intimacy of these details, especially for him, because he was such a quiet person, reveals the nuances that give us an understanding of why areas of his poetry will move us so deeply. Why, when we hear a phrase from Dark Night of the Soul, we find our inner being stirred. It is because the path he walked is so similar to every human path. So similar in its ascent and allowing, and its betrayals and disillusionments. And it's in the very fiber of those movements of all of that, of longing for human connection and being deprived of it, of giving your whole heart in service to something you didn't start, and finding yourself as one of the key targets to be oppressed. It gives a great example of the personal responsibility he took in his life to be available to the experience of the sacramental quality of each moment, and not to get into the analysis of the why. Why is this happening to me? That is so easy in our present day human nature. But rather to get to the heart of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or, arise, my beloved, and come. For see, the rains have passed, winter is over, the flowers are budding upon the land. Arise, my beloved, and come. His questions in his own life were always rooted there, right down there. And his matrix for that was silence. He says in a very short little prose, the eternal word was uttered in silence, and the soul must enter into the silence to hear that word. If we wish to have answers in our life, and I say this just as much for me as proclaiming it from him, if we wish to have answers, we have a very clear invitation. If we want to hear the eternal word on our life, we hear it in silence. And it's not the silence where we grasp and we we come fraught with our thoughts and we expect the eternal word to bang us over the head, but rather the silence that beckons like a tender lover. And we finally assent so that we can hear the whisper, we can hear it. We can hear what we're not able to hear. Just like Augustine said in his Confessions, late have I loved you, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you. I went about the streets shouting for you and could not find you. Then you shouted, shattering my deafness, and I found that you were already within. So this entering into the unknowing, let me read a little part of his beautiful poem on unknowing. Let me read a little bit of that first, and then I'll speak to the quality of unknowing. I came into the unknown and stayed there unknowing, rising beyond all science. I did not know the door, but when I found the way, unknowing where I was, I learned enormous things, but what I felt I cannot say. For I remained unknowing, rising beyond all science. It was the perfect realm of holiness and peace. In deepest solitude, I found the narrow way, a secret giving such release that I was stunned and stammering, rising beyond all science. And he who does arrive collapses as in sleep, for all he knew before now seems a lowly thing, and so his knowledge grows so deep. He remains unknowing, rising beyond all science. And if you wish to hear, the highest science leads to an ecstatic feeling of the most holy being. And from this mercy comes this deed, to let us stay unknowing, rising beyond all science. From this mercy comes this deed, to let us remain. How often we have an insight and it fills us with a sense of utter knowing in the unknowing, completeness, satisfaction, contentment. And then, like Peter at the Transfiguration, we want to build a tent there and control it and stay there forever. And in that very movement, create the instability because we want to have the knowing that it's secure in the way we want security. Because it's all we know. It's not a judgment on us. But with the mercy comes the deed, and the deed is establishing us into the state of unknowing. And there's a twofold quality to this nature of unknowing. And I like the phrase It might fall short, but for me, it captures it. Active surrender. In complete paradox, active surrender. The activity is the movement into. The activity is the slight recognition in our mind that gives the ascent into the surrender. And the surrender creates the availability. So as John was available, it was because he was established in a quality of active surrender. Not passivity, not receptivity, not resignation, not letting go, but the active movement into. If a beloved was standing before you and said, "Come into my arms, I love you," and the arms were outstretched, and you wanted that movement, you would actively move into that embrace, and in it would be a surrender of a stance that was anything but unknowing of the embrace. So John has so often been misunderstood because you've got the nada, the path of nothingness. And you can't look at the culture of the time because they were all into wearing belts with spikes and flagellation and all of that. So if you couple the misunderstanding of nothing, 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 coupled with practices that are foreign to us today because we've evolved as a species a bit, you could easily misinterpret that he was all about denial, 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 penance, 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 penance. It takes moving beyond that to grasp that he wanted it all. To grasp that he had tasted union and he saw that everything else just didn't matter. Perhaps one of his greatest heretical statements was that the soul's center is God. Even saying that today in traditional religious circles could get a little raised eyebrow. He came to that conclusion, and it wasn't a conclusion that came from his personal practice. It wasn't as though he said, I'm going to be a meditator, and I'm going to be on this path, and I'm going to observe these certain understandings and practices and try to then break open and understand reality and live reality and become awakened or illumined. That utterance, that statement came about because he was driven with the tender, all-pervading urgings of God wanting him. And if we were going to be academic, that would be a place we would say, okay, there's a differential, because not all mystics might identify a relational being in which they're transforming or becoming. But see, we have that paradox again that the way for John, the way was this pursuit of God, of him, not his pursuit of God, but the pursuit of God of him, to have the recapitulation of John into the beingness of God. And then when that happens, it has the proclamation is there, the statement that there's no going back. Wow, my very soul is God. And in the knowing of that is perhaps the greatest establishment of complete freedom. So I have one or two more things to share, but let's just take a minute in silence and close our eyes to just let some of that sink upon us a bit more. So the last bit I want to bring into that is of the paradox that John gives witness to is the embodiment of God. So if he realizes that his soul is God and he's in body and in form, and his body's not his soul, but yet there's some dance going on, John is completely at ease with letting the senses be taken up with the exploration of this God presence. If you have not taken time, meditation time, it might be good during this Carmelite series to give yourself a nice half hour of slowly reading his spiritual canticle. It's considered maybe one of his greatest works from a literature standpoint, but also from a mystical standpoint, and is his own take on the Song of Songs. But I'm going to read a passage here or there to give you a sense of the sensuality of John in this being and becoming God. Where have you hidden away? You left me whimpering, my love. Wounding me, you vanished like the stag. I rushed out, shouting for you, but you were gone. O open woods and thickets seated by the lover's hand. O meadow of green plants enameled in bright flowers. Tell me if God has come your way. Showering 1,000 graces, the beloved came hurriedly through these groves, looking at them, and in the radiance of his gaze, the lover left the woodland robed in beauty. O crystal brook, if on the silver surface of the water you instantly might form the eyes I most desire, I feel them in me like a scar. And last, my love, the mountains and the solitary wooded valleys, the unexpected islands, the loud sonorous rivers, the whistling of the loving winds, the night of total calm before the rising winds of dawn, the music of a silence, the sounding solitude. And those are only like about 10 phrases of an 88 stanza poem. So it's very long if you're not familiar with it. But you have therein a very clear theology, a very clear framework of God nature, study of God, unintentional. And that is that all creation is bursting forth and messengers of the God presence. Because of my own love of non-dual Shaiva Tantra and my experience of the Christ presence therein, I developed a wonderful workshop retreat called the Tantra of Christ. And as I was looking for correlations there, what we have as some foundation is one point. There's 7, but I want to bring in one, and that is this concept of what creation is. And creation in the Siva Sutra and the Lakshmi Tantra is conceived of 3 different vibrations, and that is unsounded sound, subtle sound, and sound as we describe it. That all the cosmology, all creation is that. And what you have in John here is just that. You have the unsounded creative life force vibrating itself in subtle ways through all of creation, where sometimes it's audible, the sounding solitude, the loud sonorous rivers. Sometimes it's subtle. Oh, crystal brook, would that you would reveal to me the eyes of my love. And you have the rooted search that's impelled by the uncreated life force coming into form. It's a quality that John, perhaps to me, more than any of the Carmelite mystics, gives valuable utterance to, that's easy to implement, that's possible for us right here and right now. If we want to take it seriously, if we want to say, wow, is this really a reality for me? Or is it a concept I want to play with a little bit? Or maybe I want to tip my toe in the water, but not let it apply to this part of my life, but let it apply to this part. We have an opportunity with his wholehearted active surrender to let it be the impetus, almost like the liminal litmus test of, wow, am I in this active surrender in this way here? Or do I have a but going on? Oh, but maybe. Because in John, we don't have that. You might argue that the level of his sufferings and the inquisition of the times and that are the reason that he was so all in. But I disagree with that. I think we have individuals of all eras that fall anywhere on the spectrum of the human story, whether it's dramatic phenomena, whether it's very subtle and appearingly mundane life circumstances. And we've got people of all ages, all backgrounds, all eras, going through a variety of similar experiences, but each having an individual response. It's not his circumstances that made him who he was. It was his unremitting response to the impelling force of the love at the center of his being. One of the things that we don't get, which I think is really kind of fortunate, is that while we have record of many of his liminal experiences, many of his ecstatic moments and all of that, and of course we have his poetry speaking to it, we don't have one of these huge transformative pivotal moments, which is delightful to see because it's rare that individuals will have one isolated moment that plunges them into union that is stable and never changes. We have little details here and there of him. So another opportunity to know that we can draw close to him, that our own lives, our own stories find a place in the larger narrative of which he is a part. So to bring this reflection to an end, I want to read one more poem O living flame of love, how tenderly you wound my soul in her profoundest core. You are no longer shy. Do it now, I ask you. Break the membrane of our sweet union. O soothing cautery, O wound that is a joy, O gentle hand, O delicate touch, tasting of eternity, repaying every debt, killing, you turn my death to life. O lamps of human fire in deep transparency, the lowest caverns of the senses, once shadowy and blind, flare in light and warmth, and wake the lover with amazing joy. How lovingly and soft you make my breast recall where you alone lie secretly, and with your honeyed breath, replete with grace and glory, how tenderly you make me love. So lovely. I wanted to go into reading it in the Spanish for you because the cadence is so nice, but I'll spare you. It is gorgeous. I have my old translation from 35 years ago, and the Spanish is right here. It's really, really lovely. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.